some areas of the country, there is low private investment, there are cultures of unemployment, and these problems are very difficult to rectify. Whilst we think it's regrettable that some people are in that situation, we think that the important thing is that we take steps to rectify that rather than leaving the problem to fester and just hope that it goes away because one day some nice company will come along and start up the mines again in North East England. That's not going to happen. So insofar as that is the case, we think it is not only legitimate but necessary and in the best interest of these people for us to take this measure. First of all, overall we think that the fact that it's legitimate for the state to do this will come from the fact that it's beneficial to these people. I'm going to look at how the state actually is intended to work in the best interest of everyone. So when people are actively taking steps against their own interest and against the interest of society, we think this is legitimate, and just why we think it will be good for everyone that this happens. First of all, in terms of our mechanism, so areas where there are systemic, endemic unemployment, the government will say to these people that they will pay their costs to relocate to cities, to prosperous areas, and we think that people will be incentivized to take that, because often the main reason that people don't relocate is they simply don't see themselves as being able to afford it. So the government will offer to pay these costs for them. We also think there's a big problem that at the moment in a lot of areas the government offers retraining programs and things like that, but often those are just a waste of time because you can't retrain someone if there's no jobs for them to use that training for. So this will still happen in tandem with retraining programs, except now that those training programs will actually be useful. So we think that's a lot better. So first of all, what do we think the problem is? Why do we think that the situation arises in the first place? Because we think there are a lot of areas where you previously may have been quite prosperous, previously may have had investment. For a whole host of reasons, that investment has died away. We think, for example, where we're from in Durham, in the northeast of England, where previously it was like a mining community, but things like technological advancement, things like importing coal from abroad, simply meant that those industries died out naturally, and it was no longer efficient for the government to continue paying for those industries. The cost of supporting people on benefits simply outstripped that. But we think that ultimately those things cannot be rectified because, for example, there is no reason to go and start mining coal again. So we think that these areas have systemic reasons why that unemployment happens. Technological advances being a main one. We think that the outcome of that has been that you get cultures of unemployment, you get generational cycles of unemployment. So it isn't just the case that one person loses their job because of this. We think that you have a kind of vicious cycle where your parents or your grandparents were unemployed, and as such, because that investment has gone away, there are no prospects for you in that area. So not only do you simply have no prospects, but you're also surrounded by people, by a culture of no prospects, and there's no reason for you to aspire to anything because you don't see as there being anything that you can access. So not only is it a kind of economic problem, but it's also a psychological problem in the sense that you don't feel like you have anything to aspire to because there's no opportunities for you. We also think that it's also often the case that when you don't have private investment into employment and industry and things like that, also state services tend to worsen in these areas. So for example, the school services and health services tend to be worse in these areas because they become lower socioeconomic areas. So again, it contributes to the cycle insofar as there's little employment in these areas, so then education gets worse as a result of that because people tend to have less money when they don't have jobs, etc., etc. So people not only can't get jobs, but they tend to have less education and less psychological aspiration in these areas. This is compounded by the fact that there's not really any political capital for the government to go in and invest in these areas, because not only do you have the fact that it's simply inefficient for the government to do that, but moreover, that's made much worse, and that's exacerbated by the fact that these people can easily be portrayed as not being worth spending money on, because the government can probably invest in areas where it's just more economically efficient. So if it's a choice for a political party to choose to invest in an area where the people can easily be portrayed as just scroungers that don't want to get jobs, compared to investing in an area which is much more efficient and prosperous, it's probably going to go for the latter because that's the politically sensible option for politicians to go for. No, thank you. So again, that compounds the problem because you continue not to get not only private investment, but you don't get much state investment in these areas either. So why do we think, first of all, that it's legitimate to take benefits away if these people choose not to move? First of all, we think that the thing is that the state isn't there just to necessarily act as a safety net for you. Overall, we think that the state is there to try and help everyone to achieve their best interests. So there's two things here. First of all, this model works in the interest of not only the people that this affects, because we are offering to relocate them where they can improve their life chances if they move to another area. So it is in their interest to incentivise this. It is against their interest to choose to stay in a place where they have no prospect and where they continue to be a drain on the state. We think not only is that not in their interest, but because they will have less money, they have less life chances, but it's also not in the interest of society. So we think that it is simply impossible to say that the state has to work in the specific interest of every individual person, because that's not possible for the state to do. The state has to act in the aggregate interest of society. If some people choose to go against them, we don't see why, insofar as none of us ever really signed a social contract or anything like that, we don't see how it is possible for us to continue to support people that choose to go against the interests of the rest of society. We also think that it's just arbitrary to say that because we happen to be born in the same place as someone, I necessarily have an obligation to sacrifice some of my well-being to support that person. So we do think that this is entirely within the remit of the state to remove these benefits if people take irrational choices, I'll take you in a second, to work against not only their interests, but the interests of society as a whole. Go ahead.
If it's such a rational choice that someone would take the relocation money to move, then why do you need to coerce them by taking away the welfare of the people who live in the state?
Okay. First of all, I've already pointed out the whole host of psychological barriers, but also often, and the fact that it's quite expensive, so we get around that as well. But we also think that, again, you don't feel like you have an impetus, because if your entire life you've simply been surrounded by people that are unemployed, or you don't have a particularly good education, you don't feel like there's any aspirational reason for you to move. But let's go into that then anyway, benefits. So first of all, we think that this buys into that POI quite nicely, because when you do relocate people to more prosperous areas, not only do they more likely have access to employment, which obviously has economic benefits, because now they can get more money, they can see themselves as proper economic actors and feel like they can achieve more. But it's also the idea of being in a prosperous area makes you feel more aspirational within yourself. So that's extremely beneficial, because now you can see yourself as being able to achieve something. Now you don't feel like you're stuck in that culture, you're stuck in that non-prosperous area, you're stuck in a dead end. You can see yourself as achieving something because you're surrounded by an entirely different culture. We also think on a practical level, state services tend to be more better in these areas because, as I say, there is more investment. So on a practical level, generally your life choices will probably be a lot better. Because we think this is in the remit of the state, or because we think this is beneficial to the people it directly affects as a society, we're very happy to pay.